Showtime! The Capital G show starts right now.
What's up YouTube, Capital G here. So we're asking the question in this video, are non-Floodgate traps dying out in the game of Yu-Gi-Oh? And I don't mean traps completely dying. I'm talking about, are we generally seeing a sharp decline in, just high trap decks? Remember when Jeff Jones won that ARG with Burning Abyss last format, and he only ran, well, he didn't run any spells, he ran 20 traps and 20 monsters. What I'm talking about is that basically a thing of the past, where you'd have these decks with 16 plus traps, and from what I've seen, I mean, everything kind of points to yes. I mean, obviously, a lot of it can be traced back to Duelist Alliance, much like everything as far as recent trends, because Duelist Alliance was the set that really power creeped cards like Torrential Tribute and Bottomless Trap Hole to where they weren't nearly as good. In Duelist Alliance, we started to have archetypes, entire archetypes that could have missed timing and float. Shadows and Burning Abyss, to a lesser extent, Yang Zing. So Tellar Knights usually pay for themselves when summoned. So cards like Torrential Tribute just became not that good. It became a lot harder to get value out of TT. So that kind of, became a lot less powerful. And then Bottomless Trap Hole against, a lot of matchups. Decks just didn't care. Shadows, try a Bottomless my window. I'll laugh at you. And you can't Bottomless Dante. So that was another card. But even now that I'm looking around the game, I mean, whether it be battle traps or, even popular cards like Evac, they just don't seem to be seeing a lot of play. Now, obviously, you're going to have decks like Burning Abyss and Tellar Knights that are going to run a decent trap count because their monsters aren't that powerful and because they have just insane level traps. They have their archetype specific traps that are just godly. I mean, I'm talking about Fire Lake and Alpha Nova. Those cards are insane. You'd never run the deck without those for the most part. But even a deck like Shadows, they've dropped their power trap. Sinister Shadow Games isn't seeing any play, and with a deck like Shadows, it's pretty easy to see why they drop their traps. They run core, but you can trigger it from the deck, so it doesn't technically really count. First in Shadows, I mean, if you're running traps, then you have the obvious conflict of interest with Denko Sek, or as I like to call him, Denko Rekka. I mean, you're really not using the guy's full potential if you have a bunch of purple cards that are constantly turning off and on his effect. And Shadows want to go second. They want to get the first dibs at the battle phase, and you want to put as much pressure on your opponent from turn one from the get-go. Ideally, you want to OTK your opponent, but you don't want a whole bunch of traps clogging up your hand, cards that you can't use until the second turn, when those could be, better served as White Dragon, Dark Dragon, BLS, Snatch Steal, cards that can add to, the damage that you have on board, cards that can potentially close the game out. Even when I look around outside of Cleese and, outside of BA and S Knights, I see Shadows, I don't really see traps there. I'm looking at Cleese and I'm seeing their trap lineup shrink. Now, a lot of this I think has to do with the Denko effect. Let's be real. Denko Sekka has changed Yu-Gi-Oh! Even if you consider it a small amount. I'm starting to notice, especially when playing, when people are playing against dolls, they're starting to flip Floodgate cards over, during the draw phase and the standby phase. They're starting to flip over the shadow mirrors and stuff because they don't want to get locked under Denko Sekka. Now, I mean, yes, that means that you can pretty much play around the Denko Sekka to a certain extent, but it also kind of, your opponent doesn't really have to, try and shoot fish in a barrel, or they don't have to kind of pick needle in a haystack when it comes to like the MSTs, because they know exactly what card to snipe. But what I'm getting at is people are adjusting the way that they play against, because Denko is such a powerful card. And again, that's half the reason why Evacs and all of these traps are pretty much not seeing any play. And another reason why I think that decks they're kind of trimming down their traps is you look at a card like Enemy Controller, and if you compare it to battle traps like Dimensional Prison and Mirror Force, there is no comparison. Enemy Controller is a card that can be used offensively and defensively, and considering so many decks have floaters now, it's not really that difficult to get kind of a floating monster on board, Enemy Controller your opponent's monster, and try and, kill them with their own monster. It's becoming increasingly more dangerous to just have one monster on board because, Snatch Steal is a thing, and Enemy Controller, again, just lets you take your opponent's monster and try and kill them with their own card. I think that enemy controller has pretty much taken over the spot of battle traps because it's chainable. It can be used on both turns. It can be used the turn you draw it. And again, it's much more versatile. So between enemy controller pretty much replacing battle traps, Denko Sekka having a huge effect because once it hits the board, outside of Solemn Warning, you're pretty much at your opponent's mercy when that card hits the board. I want to know what you guys are thinking. You know, what are you guys' thoughts? Because my understanding about Neclops is they're pretty much similar to Shaddolls. They don't run much back row, and they can, well, and the OCG, I know that some players were citing Denko, so I would imagine that they can main it too. And I think that Cleaves are trying to adjust so that they're not getting wrecked so hard by Denko. You know what I mean? They're still going to be running vanities and maybe a couple of skill drains, but I'm not even seeing Cleaves play, you know, Cleave players run Bottomless and Evacs anymore because, you know, it seems like it's either going to get sniped by MST or it's going to get hit by Denko, or you're just going to run into a deck where it's really not that effective. And it's like if you combine all of those things, you know, it starts to kind of become one big thing where it's like, should I even run Bottomless anymore? You know what I mean? So let me know what you guys think. Again, I'm not saying that all traps are not going to be played. You're going to have your, you know, Burning Abysses and S-Knights and maybe a couple of traps here and there like Climate Change and Core that are just kind of like amazing in a specific deck. But I'm talking about those cards that we used to play a ton of. D-Prison, Evac, Bottomless, Torrential. Are those cards kind of just, have they been power creeped? Are they just not really super viable? Because from what I've seen, not really seeing much play. Anyways, thank you guys for watching as always. Subscribing makes life happy.